Many years ago, before the compound learned new words like trash and restroom, life was simple. People greeted each other properly. People spoke loudly and argued freely. Nobody needed accents to survive. The compound was the usual Nigerian type with one long building, two floors, and one narrow corridor that carried sound better than a radio. The landlord lived upstairs. He liked peace but enjoyed gossip better. Then Tobias arrived. Nobody knew where Tobias was coming from. Nobody knew how long he stayed abroad. Nobody even knew if he truly went abroad. All they knew was that Tobias drove into the compound with one box, one backpack, one laptop bag, and one attitude. The first thing he did was to refuse greetings. "Good evening," Mama Sikiru said cheerfully as he passed. Tobias paused slightly, nodded once, and continued walking. Mama Sikiru frowned. Who is this one?" The children also noticed first. "Uncle did not greet," one of them whispered. "Maybe his mouth is paining him," another one replied. The second thing Tobias did was to close his door permanently, not figuratively, literally. From morning till night, Tobias' door stayed shut as if it was guarding secrets. He did not come outside to fetch water. He did not come out to throw dustbin. He did not even come out to greet the landlord. Instead, Tobias discovered the window, and the window discovered everybody. On his first morning there, the compound was quite quiet. It was just birds chirping, children playing, and one woman frying akara. Then a voice came from downstairs. "Give me 2 sachet water." Everybody froze. Mama Sikiru looked up. "Who is that?" The akara woman wiped her hands and asked, "Is that radio?" The voice came again. "Give me 2 sachet water." They looked up and saw that Tobias' window was slightly opened. Only his mouth was visible. Mama Sikiru laughed. "Which one is this? Who are you talking to?" Tobias replied sharply, "You." Mama Sikiru blinked. "Me?" "Yes," Tobias said. "Bring me 2 sachet water." Mama Sikiru folded her hands. "You did not even greet, oh." Tobias sighed loudly. "Can we just skip formalities?" Mama Sikiru laughed harder. "Hey, you want water or you want war?" The children gathered immediately. One of them whispered, "He is talking like television." Another one said, "He sounds like Gugu." Mama Sikiru shouted back, "If you want water, come down now." Tobias replied, annoyed, "I do not come down for errands." That was how it started. From that day, Tobias spoke to the compound only through the window, like a smart device, or like Alexa that forgot it was in Nigeria. "Open the gates, reduce that noise. Who parked a motorcycle near my car?" Nobody ever heard him say please. He also refused speaking pidgin. When the generator mechanic greeted him, "How far, boss?" Tobias looked at him strangely and replied, "I am fine, thank you." The mechanic stared. "I greet you now." Tobias replied, "Yes, same." The conversation ended here. When Mama Sikiru tried again one day, "Oga, your dustbin is blocking the passage, oh." Tobias corrected her sharply, "It is trash." Mama Sikiru laughed. "Is trash your uncle?" Tobias closed his window, but the compound laughed at him for 10 minutes straight. The children also began copying him. One of them shouted from upstairs, "Give me biscuits." Another one replied in a fake accent, "Reduce that noise." The landlord heard and came outside. "What is happening now?" he asked. Mama Sikiru replied, "Your new tenant thinks he's in America." The landlord squinted upstairs. But this is Nigeria now." Tobias heard and opened his window again. "This is my apartment," he announced. The landlord looked confused. "Apartment, care?" Yes, Tobias said, apartments. The landlord nodded slowly. Okay now, this your apartment rent is due next month. Tobias paused and said, I'll make a transfer. Transfer to who? The landlord asked. To your account, Tobias replied. The landlord laughed and said, my account is cash. Tobias closed his window. Another day, Tobias tried to order food. He opened his window and shouted, I need beans and bread, but nobody responded. He repeated even louder, I said I need beans and bread. Mama Sikiru shouted back, come and buy now. Tobias replied irritated, I do not work for errands. Mama Sikiru smiled and said, okay now, then hunger will walk to you. Well, that afternoon, Tobias was seen sneaking out quietly to buy bread like a normal human being. The children spotted him and one of them shouted, Uncle is walking, oh. Tobias turned back inside. He also hated noise. One day, when the children were playing football, he shouted, reduce the volume. One boy replied innocently, Uncle, is football radio? Tobias slammed his window. At night, when the generator noise started, Tobias shouted again, this sound pollution is unacceptable. But the generator owner replied calmly, Oga, light is unacceptable too. Everybody laughed. The landlord tried talking to Tobias once. My son, try to greet people, he advised. But Tobias replied, respect should be mutual. The landlord nodded, you are correct. Then he added, but this is a compound, not embassy. Tobias did not laugh. Then the biggest new offense came on a Saturday morning. Mama Sikiru brought out trash. Tobias opened his window sharply and demanded, why is trash near my car? Mama Sikiru replied, it is dustbin. Tobias shouted, trash. Mama Sikiru shouted back, rubbish. The argument escalated like that. Before you knew it, children started chanting, trash, dustbin, rubbish. The landlord came out and asked, what is the problem? When Mama Sikiru explained her part, the landlord turned to Tobias and advised, my son, yeah, we call it dustbin. Tobias shook his head and insisted, language evolves. The landlord nodded. Okay now, rent also evolves. Next month, it will evolve higher. The compound burst into laughter while Tobias closed his window slowly. By the second week, the compound had adjusted to Tobias the same way people adjust to generator noise. You complain at first, then you learn when to ignore it. Then you start mocking it for survival. Unfortunately, Tobias did not change. In fact, he upgraded. His window became his mouth became his authority, and his authority became the problem. Every morning, Tobias announced his presence without showing his face. Who parked a bicycle near my car? Nobody answered. He repeated it louder. Who parked a bicycle near my car? Mama Sikiru responded lazily from her balcony. Maybe the bicycle came by itself now. Tobias sighed loudly. I am serious. Mama Sikiru replied, so is the bicycle. The children laughed. Tobias slammed his window. The next day, Tobias discovered water shortage. He opened his window early and shouted, there is no water. But the compound ignored him. He tried again. Why is there no water? Mama Sikiru replied, because NEPA did not give us rain. Tobias frowned. This is unacceptable. Mama Sikiru laughed. So is your window. Tobias began pacing behind the window. I will report this, he said. To who? The landlord asked from downstairs. To the appropriate authority. The landlord nodded and said, I am the authority. Silence dropped. Now, one thing about Tobias was that he not only avoided speaking pidgin, he hated pidgin with passion. Whenever someone spoke pidgin to him, he would respond as if they insulted his ancestors. One afternoon, a mechanic greeted him. How will they be now, boss? Tobias replied slowly, speak English. The mechanic blinked and said, I speak am now. That is not English, Tobias said. The mechanic nodded thoughtfully and replied, okay, sir, Good afternoon. How may I assist you with the mechanical challenges you are experiencing? Tobias smiled proudly. The mechanic turned immediately to Mama Sikiru and switched back. Hey, this man go pay double. Mama Sikiru nodded. Yes, so charge am international rates. Well, Tobias paid without arguing. The compound noticed, and that was when their strategy started. The children became translators. When Tobias shouted, "Open the gates," nobody moved. One child shouted back, "Say I beg." Tobias coughed, "I do not beg." Well, the gate remained closed and he waited. Finally, he said politely, "Please open the gates." The gates opened slowly and the children clapped. Another day, Tobias tried to complain about noise again. "This environment is too loud." Mama Sikiru replied sweetly, "Compound is not library, oh." Tobias rolled his eyes and said, "I just need peace." Mama Sikiru smiled. "Peace does not need accents." The landlord watched everything silently. After all, he was a patient man. He liked watching arrogance wrestle with reality. One evening, Tobias tried to assert his dominance. He came out of his room for the first time in days. The compound went silent. He cleared his throat and said, "I think we need rules." Mama Sikiru leaned forward. "Rules like what?" Tobias replied, "No noise after 8 p.m. The generator owner laughed. "It can't be possible, oh. Light comes at 2 a.m. Tobias continued, "No cooking smells entering my room." Mama Sikiru gasped. So we should cook imagination." Tobias continued, "No playing in the corridor." The children booed. Tobias raised his voice and insisted, "This is basic civilization." The landlord finally spoke. "My son, this is a compound, though, not airport lounge." The crowd murmured in agreement. Tobias felt the resistance. That night, he tried to order sachet water again. "Bring me 2 sachet water." Nobody moved. He repeated but got silence. He then added angrily, "I am talking to you." Mama Sikiru replied, "We thought you were talking to Siri." Laughter erupted. Tobias closed his window violently. Inside his room, he paced, but outside, the compound bonded. The neighbors began exaggerating his behavior. One of them shouted mockingly, "Reduce that noise." Another one replied, "This is unacceptable." Even the landlord's dog barked suspiciously at Tobias' window. Then the tension peaked one afternoon when Tobias threw his trash downstairs. Mama Sikiru screamed, "Hey!" Tobias shouted back, "I disposed of my trash." Mama Sikiru replied furiously, "You disposed it on my head." The landlord stormed out and asked, "What is happening?" Mama Sikiru pointed, "This man threw rubbish." Tobias corrected, "Trash." The landlord paused and looked at Tobias slowly. "My son, this compound humbles everybody equally." Tobias coughed, "I am different." The landlord smiled and said, "Okay now, we will see." That night, rain suddenly started. Heavy rain that made the compound flooded. Unfortunately, the water entered Tobias' room. He opened his window and shouted, "Help!" But nobody moved. He tried again, "I need assistance." There was silence. Then he shouted louder, "Please help me." Mama Sikiru replied, "Say it very well." Tobias swallowed his pride and said, "I beg, help me." Immediately, the compound sprang into action. People laughed but helped as Tobias stood soaked, embarrassed and silent. The children even sang, "America meets Nigeria." If the neighbors thought that Tobias had been humbled permanently by the flood incident, then they were mistaken. It humbled him only briefly because pride is stubborn. It bends, then straightens itself again, sometimes even sharper than before. For 2 days after the rain, Tobias behaved like a human being. He greeted once, just once. He even said good morning to Mama Sikiru without correcting her pronunciation. The compound noticed and they were impressed. They whispered, "Maybe he has learned." But arrogance does not disappear. It hides and waits. By the third day, Tobias was back to default. It started small. He began closing his door harder again. His window opened less and his voice returned to command mode. Why is the corridor dirty? Nobody responded at first. He repeated it louder. This corridor is dirty. Mama Sikuru replied from downstairs. Then clean it now. Tobias coughed. That is not my responsibility. Mama Sikuru smiled and said, then mind your business. The children laughed and Tobias slammed his door. He also returned to correcting language aggressively. When a woman told her child, throw that dustbin away, Tobias opened his window sharply and corrected, it is trash. The woman replied, it is rubbish. Tobias shouted, this is ignorance. The woman shouted back, this is Nigeria. Applause came from nowhere and Tobias felt attacked. Inside his room, he paced angrily again. He strongly believed that the compound was jealous of his exposure, jealous of his grammar, and jealous of his confidence. So he decided to assert his authority more. On Saturday morning, Tobias printed a paper. He came outside for the second time since moving in. The compound froze. He cleared his throat dramatically. About the rules last time, I have drafted some guidelines, he announced. Mama Sikuru laughed. Guidelines for who? For everyone, Tobias replied. The landlord leaned against the wall, curious. Tobias began reading from the paper. No loud music before 7 a.m. No cooking with heavy oil. No children playing in common areas. No drying clothes in visible places. The silence grew thick. Mama Sikuru raised her hand and said, is this your compound? Tobias replied, we share the space. The landlord laughed and said, my son, you share rent, not authority. The crowd murmured, but Tobias continued anyway. Trash must be disposed properly. Mama Sikuru interrupted, dustbin. Tobias snapped, trash. Mama Sikuru folded her hands and said, rubbish. The argument escalated and the children began chanting again, trash, dustbin, rubbish. Tobias shouted, you people are uncivilized. That word landed badly and the compound went quiet. The landlord blinked and asked, what did you say? Tobias repeated it, uncivilized. The landlord nodded slowly and said, my son, this uncivilized place houses you. From that day, the compound stopped tolerating Tobias. They switched to compliance by confusion. When Tobias shouted, reduce that noise, they reduced nothing. When he shouted, open the gates, they asked, which gates? When he shouted, who touched my car? They replied, which touch? Every instruction now became a question and every order required translation. The children even turned it into a game. One day, Tobias shouted, I need water. The children replied, which water? Sachet water, Tobias said. How many? They asked. 2, Tobias replied. Which brand? Tobias screamed when he realized they were playing with him. Mama Sikuru laughed hard. Tobias then decided to involve more authority. He called the landlord and complained, this compound is hostile. The landlord nodded. They are friendly to friendly people. Tobias frowned and said, I demand respect. The landlord replied calmly, respect is not commanded, it is earned. Tobias hung up. Then the next humiliation came unexpectedly. Tobias' generator refused to start one evening. The whole compound heard the clicking sound of failure. Tobias opened his window and said, I need help. But nobody responded. He shouted again and said, my generator is not working. The generator repairman passed by and greeted, how far? Tobias replied angrily, speak English, my friend. The repairman shrugged, no English today, I am tired. Tobias swallowed hard and said, I need assistance. The repairman looked around and said, wow, so this grammar does not start generator. Tobias paused. Then he tried again. I beg, help me. The repairman smiled. That is better. He then fixed the generator for him slowly, very slowly. Still, Tobias paid extra. The compound noticed and that night, Children sang, "Abeg, help me," near his door. Tobias closed his door tightly. Inside, his anger boiled. He felt surrounded, outnumbered, and disrespected. But instead of learning, he decided to dominate harder. The next morning, Tobias placed his trash outside his door with a note, "Do not touch." Mama Sikuru touched it. She even moved it closer to his door. Tobias exploded. "Who moved my trash?" Mama Sikuru replied calmly, "I touched the rubbish." The landlord came out again. "My son, this thing you are carrying is pride, oh." Tobias replied, "I have standards, period." The landlord smiled. Standards without humility become noise. That evening, Tobias tried to record a voice note complaining about the compound. As he spoke, children shouted loudly outside his door, "Reduce that noise." Tobias paused and asked, "Who is making noise?" The children replied together, "You." Now, that broke something inside Tobias. For the first time, he realized something painful. The compound was practically laughing at him. Tobias sat alone that night, listening to the sounds of the compound, the laughter, the conversation, and the familiar noise. He felt excluded. The accent that once made him feel superior now made him lonely. Still, pride held him tightly. "I am not wrong," he whispered. See, the problem with arrogance is not that people laugh at it. The real problem is that life eventually stops laughing too. For Tobias, that moment came quietly on a Wednesday afternoon that looked harmless until it became unforgettable. The compound was unusually calm. The children were inside. Mama Sikiru was peeling yam slowly, and the landlord sat on his plastic chair, enjoying the silence like a man who knew it would not last. Inside his room, Tobias was on a call talking confidently. "Yes, I will handle it." The call ended. Then his phone vibrated again. Low battery. He plugged it in, but nothing happened. He tried another socket. Still nothing. The power had gone out. "This is unacceptable," Tobias muttered. He opened his window and asked, "Why is there no electricity?" Nobody answered. He tried again, louder this time. "Why is there no electricity?" Mama Sikiru replied calmly without looking up. "NEPA took it." "When will it be restored?" Tobias asked. Mama Sikiru shrugged and said, "Ask NEPA." Tobias sighed loudly. "I have an important online meeting." The landlord looked up slowly and said, "This is a compound, not conference center." Tobias rolled his eyes and slammed the window, but heat started to roast him. His phone's battery was also at 5%. Panic entered him and he rushed outside with his laptop for the first time in days. The compound froze and stared at him. Tobias cleared his throat and asked stiffly, "Does anyone have power?" There was silence. He adjusted his tone and tried again. "I need electricity urgently." Mama Sikiru looked up. "For what?" "I have a meeting," Tobias said. The landlord nodded. "Good." Tobias waited, but nothing happened. He then asked, "Can I use someone's generator?" Mama Sikiru tilted her head. You want to borrow?" Tobias frowned and said, "No, borrow is not the word. I will compensate." Mama Sikiru smiled. "Say it properly." Tobias swallowed his spit and mumbled, "Please." Mama Sikiru looked around theatrically. "Did you hear something?" The children giggled. The landlord then intervened. "My son, go and greet people properly." Tobias stiffened and said, "Good afternoon," to no one in particular. Mama Sikiru replied sweetly, "Good afternoon." The landlord nodded. "Now speak like a human being." Tobias sighed deeply and said reluctantly, "Abeg, help me with lights." The compound reacted immediately. Someone brought an extension cable, someone cleared space, and the generator owner started his machine. Noise filled the air instantly. Tobias sat awkwardly on a plastic chair with his laptop balanced on his knees and sweat forming on his forehead. But as he tried to connect, the internet failed. Why is the network poor? He asked. Mama Sikuru replied, network does not understand accents. Unfortunately, the meeting started without him. He stared at the screen helplessly as connection failed, stared back at him. For the first time since moving in, Tobias looked small. Then the real humiliation came. As he stood to return inside, he slipped. The plastic chair broke under him and he fell hard. The compound went silent for 1 second, then laughter exploded. Children screamed with joy. Mama Siku recovered her mouth and said, sorry oh. The landlord stood up quickly and asked, are you okay? Tobias sat on the ground, stunned, embarrassed and dusty. His laptop survived, but his pride did not. Someone helped him up. He brushed himself slowly and said, no problem. Well now, his accent had disappeared. That evening, Tobias stayed inside. There was no window announcements, no corrections, and no grammar. Surprisingly, the next morning, he opened his door, not the window. He opened the door. The compound noticed immediately. Mama Sikuru paused while sweeping. The children stopped their game. Even the landlord looked up from his chair slowly, like a man watching a movie reach its final scene. Tobias stepped out with his trash in his hand. He walked to the compound dustbin quietly and dropped it inside. As he turned to go back inside, Mama Sikuru spoke. Good morning. Tobias hesitated, then replied, good morning, Ma. The ma surprised even him. Mama Sikuru smiled and said, hope you slept well. Yes, Tobias replied, thank you. That was all. Later that afternoon, Tobias needed water. He stood by his door for a moment thinking. The window was there. It was familiar and easy. But he ignored it. He walked downstairs. Mama Sikuru was there again. Please, do you know where I can get sachet water? He asked her. Mama Sikuru looked at him properly for the first time and said, yes, follow me. As they walked, Tobias noticed things he had ignored before. The children were laughing and neighbors were greeting each other. Life was happening without any performance. It was obvious that nobody hated him. They just did not recognize him as one of them yet. That evening, Tobias sat outside on a plastic chair under the mango tree, the same chair that once betrayed him. The landlord joined him and said, my son, how body? I am fine, sir, Tobias replied. The landlord nodded and said, this place is not America, but it is home. Tobias exhaled slowly. I know. I just forgot that for a while. The landlord smiled and said, exposure is good. Arrogance is what offends people. Tobias nodded. I understand now. The landlord then stood up and left him there. Later that night, the children played football again and the ball rolled near Tobias' door. One boy shouted, Uncle, abeg, throw the ball for us. Tobias picked it up and threw it back without any noise complaints. The boy smiled and said, thank you, Uncle. Tobias smiled back. The next day, Tobias greeted people first. Good morning, how are you? People responded in shock, but soon they adjusted. They stopped mocking him and stopped exaggerating his words. They also allowed him space to change without dragging his past behavior everywhere. One afternoon, Mama Sikuru laughed and said, see this one, oh, he now speaks Nigerian English. Tobias laughed too and replied, I am bilingual. Even though Tobias still spoke American English, still liked his grammar and still preferred trash to dustbin in his head, he no longer corrected people as if they were wrong for existing. He knew now that humility should speak louder than any accent if he wanted to truly be at home in his environment. Thank you for watching the story. Kindly share your thoughts about the story with me in the comment section. Give the story a thumbs up and share the story out with your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel if you've not done so by now. Until I bring another story your way. Bye.